William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. Welcome to the College of Conflict, being held at Barbeck's Restaurant at 8949 Garland Road, Dallas, Texas. Gently embracing the east side of White Rock Lake. When I entered, I was greeted like coming home to Grandma's house, warm and friendly. When visiting the Barbeck's Restaurant, tell them you want your reservations for the next College of Complex class.
This is our 258th meeting since we started in February of 2009. This actually started in Chicago in 1951 for the purpose of solving all the world's problems. They're still working at it. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We give them an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, remind the interrupter, we're going to listen to one fool at a time. It's one of our rules. And if anybody interrupts the speaker, then our speaker gets to, we get questions and answers from the audience, and then after that, our speaker gets a comment and close the meeting, gets the last word. Prior to that, we give everyone here who wants to 5 minutes at the podium to respond to what the speaker said for or against. That's how it works. Anyway, before we put our speakers on, we have announcements. So if anybody has announcements they want to make, now's the time. Anybody have an announcement they want to make? No announcements? I can't believe this. No announcements. Susie's not here. No announcement. You got any announcements? No? All right. Anyway, next week we have Judge Martin Hoffman. He's going to talk on expanding judicial foreclosures in Texas. It ought to be interesting. February 14th, we have Kurt Hyde. He's going to be talking about on being aware and beware of an Article 5 Constitutional Convention. It's on your itinerary there. I won't be here, but yeah, he's gonna bring. Anyway, February 21st, we're going to have John Beasley. He's sitting right here. He's English-born author, retired after a long career with Xerox. He's going to talk about why the U.S. needs a progressive party. That ought to be interesting. On February 28th, personal philanthropy. That's Max Smith. He's sitting right here too. He's going to discuss personal philanthropy, how the average person could be a philanthropist. And that's on your itinerary also. You can read about it there. And on March 7th, we have corruption in the middle-level marketing industry. And example, Amway within the Republican Party. That's E. Robert Smith. He'll be our speaker then. That's all on the itinerary. You can read it. Anyway, our speaker tonight is Jim Gatewood. He's a Dallas history professor and best-selling Dallas author. He's going to talk about Lone Wolf Gonzaullas and the Assassination of Poncho Villa. He's a writer of several books about Dallas history. He's going to discuss and review his latest book, Lone Wolf Gonzaullas and the Assassination of Poncho Villa. I mentioned that. And how 25 years after the murder of his two older brothers, Manuel Gonzaullas' mission was completed when he buried Poncho Villa at the feet of his brother's grave. Jim will also show how Manuel Gonzaullas stood for public hangings and corporal punishment in schools and the ramifications of how this attitude carries over to this day. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Jim Gatewood.
Well, I've always had a passion for history, and if money had been no problem, I would have followed Alexander's conquest of Persia. But money was a problem, so I took Dallas County. I can handle that. Now, a little commercial. I've written several books. One of them may touch your tender nerves. Some of you were probably here when I spoke about the Kennedy assassination. That's my best-selling book. And it's real simple. After you read it, everything comes into focus, and you kind of have to laugh at all that stuff that came out on TV because it's right under your nose. The assassination of John F. Kennedy was nothing more or less than the culmination of gang warfare right here on the streets of Dallas. The Italian mafia versus the Irish mafia. And the Irish underestimated the Italians. And the mafia is still in business today, but they were about to get wiped out. Now, probably the next best-selling book is a book about Sheriff Bill Decker. Some of you are old enough to remember him. He was sheriff of Dallas County for 21 years. He was so popular, he was never opposed politically. He was asked several times to run for the United States Senate, and each time he'd say, well, I got the sheriff's department, it's such a mess, nobody can clean it up but me, I better wait a while. So he never did run for the Senate. Then there's the book about Slatch Rogers and the Love Field Lunatics. First airplane built in the state of Texas was built by Slatch Rogers. And after World War I, the government sent down an edict, burn all the airplanes. They were dangerous, there was no practical use for them, the war was over, the government didn't want them. Slatch Rogers and B.B. Owens, a local philanthropist who gave quite a bit of money to the Salvation Army here in Dallas, made a proposition with the people at Love Field. They said, we will buy all the airplanes. There were around 600 of them there at the field at the time. We'll buy all the airplanes for $100 a piece on a consignment basis, and they sold them for $200 a piece. And when you bought one, you got 2 hours of instructions, and then you could fly it home. That was the old Flying Jennies. There's a picture in the book, a fellow up here in Richardson bought 2 of them, and his plane is pictured next to his house. You can see the cotton growing up around the plane. Then there's the book the girls like about Bonnie Parker and baby daughter. That's Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. They had a baby daughter. I'd heard the rumor of it, and in 2011, Bonnie Parker's baby daughter showed up in Gibbons, Louisiana. They have a Bonnie and Clyde festival each Saturday closest to May 23rd. That's when Bonnie and Clyde were ambushed there in Gibbons. They reenact the shootout. Historians from all over the country come in and tell their tales, and here was the girl that I'd written a book about, showed up at the convention, at the festival, Bonnie and Clyde Festival. Then there's a book about Benny Binion, Dallas gambler and mob boss. And what I liked about that book especially, and there's something for us, a moral to this story. Benny Binion fell deeply in love with a Mexican girl when he was in Mexico. She was 17, she worked in a brothel. Now she was taking heroin, most of the girls working in the brothel did, that's the way they controlled them. And Benny wanted to marry her, he wanted to run off with her. She couldn't go, she couldn't leave her heroin, and they moved her, and Benny never knew what happened to her. She was moved to Chihuahua City, the capital of the state, where she continued her trade. But as a result of that, Benny Binion was diametrically opposed to narcotics. And in 1938, the largest drug bust in the history of Texas went down right here in Dallas, Texas. Joe Savella, our mafia don, who died only 11 years ago, and his 3 sons were put in jail. Sheriff Bill Decker called Benny Binion on the phone and said, Benny, come over to my office right now. You're in big trouble. I want to talk to you. Benny said, are you going to arrest me, Bill? And he said, I don't know. He said, come over and we'll talk about it. So Binion showed up, and Decker told him, he said, you're in big trouble because Joe Savella is getting busted. He's been put in jail. Now, Joe and Benny were close. Joe helped Benny become the kingpin of bootlegging here in Dallas. And Benny Binion later became the #1 man in gambling, and he actually ran Dallas. He was paying the city mayor $60,000 a year, and each city councilman $20,000 a year. He had the sheriff on his payroll, and he had the Dallas police chief on his payroll. He ran Dallas. So Decker is talking to him, and he says, Benny, the problem is this. He said the kingpin of the drug dealers here in Dallas has been put in jail. The mafia is going to come back to Dallas. They're going to ask you to go back into the drug business and lead this parade. Now, at this time in our history, in 1938, Dallas was the murder capital of the Southwest. We had more murders per capita here in Dallas than any other city in the United States. The mayor and the city council and everybody was giving the sheriff hell because they wanted this cleaned up. Now was Decker's chance, and he saw it. So he made this deal with Benny. He said, Benny, you make a list of all your competitors in the gambling business here in Dallas, and I'll run them out of town. Now, in return, I want you to run all the drug dealers out of town. So Benny put the word on the street. Any drug dealer that stays in Dallas after sundown this coming Saturday will have to leave in a pine box if he hadn't left. Now, Decker had a lot of snitches and a lot of connections. They knew who they were. Those that didn't leave were put in a pine box. Decker got a call from Sheriff Fye up in Denton County, said, we've got a barn up here with 11 bodies in it. We want you to send someone up to identify them. So Decker sent Ed Castor and Hickey Bright up there, two of his deputies, and they called him on the phone, called Decker, said, yeah, these are Dallas drug dealers. They've all got a hole in their head. They've been killed. So Decker said, well, tell Sheriff he can close his file. We know who they are. He hung up the phone and called Benny Binion on the phone. You see, this was Benny Binion's barn these 11 bodies were in. Said, Benny, clean up your trash in Denton County. Now, if you can imagine, later that moonlight night, there's a farm to market road being built in Denton County. Two ex-Texas Rangers who got fired, Manuel Gonzaullas is one of them. This story is in his book. Crank up this maintainer. The 11 bodies are laid out in front of them. They cover them with dirt. We don't know how many drug dealers are buried up there in Denton County in that roadbed. But you could not buy drugs in Dallas from 1938 till 1946 when Benny Binion left town. This is good Dallas history that was laying there fallow. I'm glad that I didn't go to Persia to follow Alexander's conquest because, boy, I'm surrounded right here. And I've got 5 books on downstream that are in the pipeline. I've got 8 that have been published. And we'll put some of this good history away. Now let's get down to brass tacks and talk about Manuel Gonzaullas, Lone Wolf Gonzaullas, and the assassination of Poncho Villa. Now, Manuel Gonzaullas, M.T. Gonzaullas, was born July 4th, 1891, same year my father was born. His godfather was a fellow by the name of Don Luis Teresa. Teresa is the last name, and that's Gonzalez's middle name, Teresa. Don Luis Teresa is Manuel Gonzalez's godfather. Don Luis Teresa was a general during the French and Mexican Revolution. And as you know, the Mexican Federales won that, and the French had to leave and go back. It was Napoleon's gang over here, and he couldn't spare any more troops because he was worried about what the Prussians were doing on the Prussian front, so he really didn't help Maximilian out, and they lost the war. So General Don Luis Teresa expropriated all the land that was owned by French citizens and French army. As a result, he had holdings in the state of Chihuahua of over 9 million acres. Very wealthy man. Now, Manuel Gonzaullas' father is the foremost mining engineer in the world. And he is working with Don Luis Teresa, setting up silver mines. This state of Chihuahua is very rich in silver. And Father Gonzaullas asked Don Luis, he said, would you be my son's godson? And he was. So this is where the middle name Teresa comes from. Now to give you just a little more insight into Don Luis Teresa and his 9 million acres. When William Swift decided to build a packing house in Fort Worth, he contacted Don Luis Teresa and said, can you furnish me 100,000 head of cattle annually? Don Luis Teresa took his cigar out of his mouth and said, what color? It just was absolutely no problem. This man is extremely wealthy. Now, Manuel Gonzaullas and his 2 older brothers are homeschooled by their mother, Helen Gonzaullas. She is of German descent. She is a devout Presbyterian. She homeschools the boys because they're moved from country to city to country following the father's mining expertise. And the first thing they study every morning is a chapter in the Bible. And after this chapter is read, the 3 boys ask questions about what was in the chapter. And by the time Manuel is 8 years old, he's been through the Bible twice. And he's very well founded for an 8-year-old boy and what's in the Bible. And he's very serious about his religion. Now when he's 8, the family is living on the hacienda just outside of Hermosillo, Mexico, which is over on the west coast, not too far from the Pacific Ocean, so they get those cool breezes coming in there. They're living in this hacienda that is owned by Don Luis Teresa. And it's in the month of November, late in the month of November after Thanksgiving. The family, the mother and father, Gonzaullas, and Don Luis Teresa and his wife have gone into the capital of the state, Chihuahua City, to do some Christmas shopping. Now, while they're away, Poncho Villa and all his men raid the ranch. The reason they raid the ranch is because Don Luis Teresa has his silver catch hidden there at the ranch. They're looking for this silver and they cannot find it. Now, fortunately for Manuel Gonzaullas, he and his two brothers were playing hide and seek. And because Manuel is the youngest one and only 8 years old, he has a nanny that's giving him guidance about where to hide, and they've hid in a hayloft. They're in this hayloft when Poncho Villa and his men come onto the ranch, and they witness the shooting where several of the ranch men are killed. There is a short resistance. Of course, they're overrun. And they hide up there during the night, and the bandits, of course, have taken over things, and they've built fires, and they can hear women screaming and the screams of his two older brothers as they're being tortured, because the bandits are trying to determine the location of a large cache of silver bars that they know that Don Luis Teresa has hidden somewhere on the ranch. Manuel's two older brothers were killed during this torture. Of course, Manuel doesn't know it that night. The bandits find the gold. There's a rug in the ballroom of the hacienda, and under that rug there's a trapdoor that leads into the cellar, and they make off with 210 bars of silver. And this, of course, helps Poncho Villa finance the revolution. Now, the next morning after the bandits have left, the ranch cadre come and they bring the nanny and Manuel down from the barn, and he learns about the death of his brothers. His mother and father and Don Luis Teresa come back from Chihuahua City, and there is a funeral that's held there. There's a chapel on the hacienda, and his two older brothers are buried in the cemetery in the chapel. As little Manuel Gonzaullas stands there, and the service for his brothers are being held, and his mother is sobbing, his father's face is wet with tears, little Manuel grits his teeth and swears a vendetta against Poncho Villa and all his men, swearing that he will someday kill Poncho Villa and as many of his men as possible. The family is grief-stricken, and they move to Galveston, Texas, to get away from Mexico and the memories of the older brothers. His father is given a job as the port of entry, port manager there in Galveston, because he's fluent in several different languages. They moved there just in time for Galveston to be hit by the 1900 killer hurricane, and Manuel loses his two parents. Now, he's very angry with God. Even though he is a devout Presbyterian, he doesn't understand why God has taken his family from him. The reverend there, Manuel, winds up in an orphanage that's Presbyterian orphanage run by a reverend in the Presbyterian Church, Reverend Dan. Reverend Dan tells Manuel, you have got to decide whether you're going to be angry with God for the rest of your life, or for what purpose has God spared you? Manuel is raised in this orphanage. He's a small boy, and as a result of that, he's picked on. And there's quite a few fights. Now, a lot of these fights are at the mess hall in the evening meals. And the cooks always run out and stop the fights, because they want the boys to wait till they've cleaned up and finished the dishes. They can finish their fight then as soon as they have time to get a bet down on who's going to be the winner. And one of the cooks takes a liking to Manuel because he's got a great spirit, even though he's not very big. And his name is Roy Stewart. He left Edinburgh, Scotland to fight professionally here in the United States, and he left Chicago because there was a man with a gun after him who was upset about his wife's affections with Roy Stewart, and he winds up in Galveston, a cook in the orphanage. So he shows Manuel several of the moves of the professional fighters. Manuel is a quick learner, and the older boys learn to leave him alone. Now, also in this Presbyterian orphanage, there's a fellow by the name of Nick Nadolski. Nick Nadolski was the fencing instructor for the Tsar of Russia's Olympic team, and he starts a fencing class there in the orphanage. Manuel learns the art of the swords, the épée, the foil, and the saber, and he likes the saber best of all. And he learns everything with his right hand, and then he switches and learns the same moves with his left hand, becoming an double-handed swordsman. And this makes him very deadly, and there's a tournament there in Galveston, and he receives a trophy. He's the #1 fencer in the classes there in Galveston, the intramural fencing bouts. Now, this will serve him well later in lifetime, as you'll see as the story unfolds. He has a friend who has kin on the King Ranch, not too far out of Corpus Christi. And he spends the summer with his friend in between classes at the King Ranch. And the first thing, he is drawn to the gunsmith because he's fascinated with weapons. And he makes a deal with the gunsmith. He said, I will clean up your armory here every night. I will help you with your tools. I'll be your step and fetch. And in return, all that I ask is you let me fire all the pistol ammunition that I can reload. This deal is struck, and Manuel becomes very proficient with pistols that summer. And again, he learns with his right hand, and he learns with his left hand, so that he is ambidextrous with the use of pistols, and very deadly. He takes to it naturally, and it's almost as though the muzzles of those weapons have eyes of their own. He just does not miss. Now, on his way back from the King Ranch to Corpus Christi, he's going in a caravan of wagons that are leaving the King Ranch. They're going to pick up goods and bring them back to the ranch. And he's going to catch the train in Corpus Christi to Galveston. They're attacked by the Comanche Indians. Fortunately, and for some reason, he's the only one that's not killed. But he has been attacked by a boy about his size who is the son of the Comanche chief. And he's managed to get the long hair of the Comanche, his head pulled back. He's taken the knife from the Comanche that was in his scabbard, and he's holding that knife at the Comanche's throat. The chief holds up his hand like that, and Manuel releases the boy. Now the boy is furious, and he wants to regain any reputation. He realizes that his honor is at stake. So it is decided that Manuel will suffer the flight of the arrow. Now the flight of the arrow is a game that the Comanches play with their prisoners. And the prisoners, the pilgrims, the pioneers, of course, are wearing shoes, and their feet are very tender. The Comanche, on the other hand, has gone barefooted, and he has calloused feet. And he can run across the desert. The stones and the cactus don't bother him. Where, of course, the pilgrim or the pioneer, he doesn't go very far. His feet are bleeding, and he just can't make it. So what they do, the Comanches will fire an arrow out as far as they can shoot it. The pilgrim gets to go out to the arrow, and when he reaches that arrow, the race begins. And the Comanches, of course, can kill him once they capture him. Manuel is familiar with this game, so he has a plan. When the brave with the bow has got the arrow headed and about to release it, Manuel spins from his captors, breaks away, and tackles the bowman. Now the bowman, again, is the same Comanche son of the chief. And there, Manuel again has taken his knife away from him, and one of the Indian tribe pitches a knife to the chief's son. Now the two men are dueling. The Comanche comes in with a bear-like approach, while Manuel, being instructed in fencing, of course, is very deft with his knife. As a result of this, Manuel gets many hits on the arm of the Comanche chief holding the knife, and he's bleeding profusely, and he's losing his strength. Manuel overcomes him and has him again with the knife to his throat. The chief holds up his hand like that. Manuel accepts this as the fact that they're going to spare his life, which they do. He pitches the knife out on the ground, and he loads his dead comrades who have been scalped into a wagon and starts off for Corpus Christi. Now he gets back to the orphanage, and he graduates from school, and he's looking for work. And he's on Post Office Street in Galveston, which there's a lot of saloons and taverns on that street. It's a tough part of town. And six guys about his same age attack him. You see, Manuel looks very much like a Hispanic. And at that time in our history, the Anglos were mad at the Hispanics because of the massacre of the soldier at the Alamo. So any Mexican is liable to be picked on if he isn't running in a group. Manuel, of course, is not a Mexican. He tries to tell these people this. They don't believe him. And the six of them are grappling with him there in the street. It's in the afternoon. It's dusty and it's hot. In the meantime, two big men that look like Texas A&M tackles come out of a tavern. They're linemen. They work for Texas Telephone and Telegraph. Their job is to climb the poles and string the wires. And they've been drinking, it's late in the afternoon, and they see this fight and all this uproar. And all of a sudden, all these boys break away, and Manuel is standing there, he's drawn a knife. And of course, they're backing off from him, and they're cussing him and so forth. And these two telephone linemen are interested in this, and they walk down the street, and they separate the boys, and they say, okay, which one of you will fight him one-on-one? Well, the biggest guy in the crowd said, I'll knock him clean out into the Gulf. Just let me at him. And they say, how about it, young fella, you want part of this? He says, I'll take him. So the fight starts. Now the big fellow has got some boxing expertise, and he lands a dynamite-like blow on Manuel right off the bat and knocks him to the ground. And there's a loud scream of anguish. The lineman didn't know whether it was pain or anger, fear or what, but this animal-like sound comes from Manuel. And instead of getting up, he runs across, he's kneeled down, and he tackles his adversary. And it was such a fast move, the linemen weren't able to determine whether it was his fist, a knee, a headbutt, or what. But the larger fellow is laying there groveling in the ground. He starts to get up, and Manuel hits him with an open hand. His fist is not, he slaps him up beside the ear. The man rolls over, and he's laying on the ground, and he's snapping just like a dog that's been hit. Manuel steps over the body and says, what fool is next? Nobody else approached him. The two linemen picked him up, and they took him into the nearest tavern and sat him down and got him a beer. They said, our tool pusher, the man who runs the tools up the telephone pole for us, has broken his arm, and there is a job opening. Now we're going to get you a job. We know you're looking for work, but there's something we want you to do for us. You see, we're big men and we love to fight. But we go into these taverns, and because we're so big, we can't get a fight. Nobody will fight with us. So what we want you to do, you go in by yourself, you start an argument or fight, and we'll come over and help you out. Now, if you'll do this, we'll get you a job as a tool pusher. So Manuel Gonzaullas is working as bait for these two big linemen. And it's one Saturday night, they've stayed out a little later than usual, and these three Hispanics are sitting at the table, and they're singing La Cucaracha, and they're drinking. Now, La Cucaracha was the marching song for the Villa Brigade. Manuel knows this. He's fluent in Spanish. He sits down, he talks to these three men. He learns that they did indeed ride with Poncho Villa. Not only that, but they were on the raid when his brothers were killed. When he determines this, he has a knife in his boot. He has brass knuckles in his jacket pocket. He comes out and very quickly kills all three men. The two linemen, of course, are upset. This wasn't the kind of fight they were looking for. They grab him and they're leaving the tavern, but they're caught by the police. Now the two linemen, the barkeeper testifies as to what happened. The two linemen are not involved, but Manuel is in jail for manslaughter. Now, he asked the guard, the prison guard, for a Bible. He's in the cell by himself. He's laying there, he's confused, he's upset, he feels vindicated, he's glad he killed him, but he's not sure he's on the right path, and he's got this Bible. He's not able to sleep. It's early in the morning at first light, and the light's coming through the bars in his cell. And he sees a woman there that he thinks is his mother, and the light's all around her. And then he realizes, no, it's not my mother. This lady has wings, and it's an angel. He's having a revolution, and the angel asks him, how can we serve you? Fear not. And Manuel said, I would like to have the power and the honor to deliver God's wrath to those men who have evil demons inside them that allow them to kill, rape, plunder, and steal. The angel said, have no fear, your wish will be granted. Now the next day, the reverend in charge of the Presbyterian school where Manuel's going to school finds out about him being in jail and what's happened. And it just so happens that a classmate of his is the circuit judge who's going to hear the case. So he gets together with him and explains why Manuel did what he did and the circumstances and the fact that he is indeed a very devout Presbyterian. And he says, we are about to leave on a mission to go to China. And if you will parole Manuel T. Gonzaullas to my custody, we will take him to China with us and get him off the scene here. So the wish is granted, and Manuel leaves for China. I can't begin to tell you the horrors that are going on in China at that time, because he gets there just in time for the Boxer Revolution. I can tell you this, the Chinese were a very superstitious people. If there was a drought, they blamed it on the Christians. If there was a flood, they blamed it on the Christians. If there was some kind of plague, it was because we have Christians among us. There was a great deal of misunderstanding and a great deal of hatred for the Christians, and the Boxers were in their prime. And as time goes by, they attack the mission. Manuel he's brought his Winchester rifle and 2 6-shooters with him. There's 11 rounds of ammunition in the rifle and 6 in each pistol. That's 12 and 11 is 23. It's got 23 rounds of ammunition. No one else has brought guns. They didn't come to fight. This is just Manuel's hobby, more or less. And he is a star performer defending the mission. It makes the difference in many of the battles. But finally, the Boxers are well organized and they overrun the mission, and Manuel runs out of ammunition, and he is retreated to the citadel within the mission. Now he still has his saber, and he's been wounded. And the Boxers overrun the citadel, and he is surrounded with them, and he feels his strength waning. He's bleeding, he has many wounds, and he knows that he's going to die. So he figures, well, I may as well take as many of these Boxers with me as I can. And where the strength and the energy comes from, he did not know. Perhaps it's dying strength or power that comes to you when you're dying, but he attacked the Boxers, and he killed 6 of them. And he so frightened the remaining Boxers, they thought he was some sort of demon or witch, that they retreated, and that saved the day for the mission. Now, fortunately, it was only a few hours later when a group of Marines showed up, and of course, this resolved the problem. Manuel was very near death. They took him, they're on a city that's on the Yangtze River. They took him to the Yangtze River where he was loaded on a gunboat, taken downstream to the Asiatic fleet, which was taking on coal, and they put him on Admiral Dewey's flagship, the Olympia. Now, they brought him back to San Diego. That was their orders. They were leaving for San Diego. And Don Luis Teresa came to San Diego to the hospital and sat with him until he was combat ready again. He convalesced. And once he was combat ready, Don Luis Teresa told him, he said, I have a mission for you. He said, my son has been kidnapped by Poncho Villa, and I want you to go into Chihuahua City, which was at that time under the control of Poncho Villa and his men, and rescue my son and kill Poncho Villa. This was fine with Manuel. He accepted the mission. They sent a guide with him. He went in and he was able to rescue Teresa's son and bring him back. He was not able to kill Poncho Villa, but he did leave some of Poncho Villa's men unable to take on any more air. And he came back to San Diego, and Don Luis told him, he said, now I'm going to send you to talk to Rafael Huerta. Rafael Huerta was a strong man in Mexico, and Don Luis wrote a letter. And when Manuel saw him, he gave the letter to Huerta, and the letter said, and Don Luis Teresa provided Manuel with a horse and a rifle and 2 6-shooters again. And the letter explained that Manuel's mission was to kill Poncho Villa, to search him out and find him. That he was not to take orders from anyone, and this was to prevent treachery or somebody double-crossing him and selling information to the enemy. But he set out on his quest to kill Poncho Villa. Now his first assignment, his first military assignment, was to be an observer at the city of Zacatecas. Now Zacatecas was attacked by Poncho Villa, who had the largest army of the north. Over 7,000 men attacked the city. All the battles in this revolution followed the railroad tracks. That was their means of transportation. There were 4 railroad trains with men, cannon, and equipment came in and attacked the city. And they did defeat the defenders. And they took everything from the city. Zacatecas was the richest city in the country of Mexico per capita. All the silver mines took all their silver there. It was right in the middle of a vast field of silver mines. The Mexican army systematically loaded everything of any value onto their trains. They took all the horses, all the paintings, mirrors, furniture, anything of any value. That they couldn't take, they destroyed. They destroyed statues, they broke out all the windows in the houses, they raped the women, they just left the town desolate, shot the men, and of course, Manuel is observing all this. Now his next assignment was to go to the city of Calais. Calais is about 60 miles north of Mexico City. And in the meantime, the Federal Army had hired German mercenaries. These mercenaries showed the Mexican Federal Army how to dig trenches and set up barbed wire. Poncho Villa's thrust was always with cavalry. He'd overrun the position, and of course the barbed wire would stop the cavalry. Also, this was an agricultural area, and they had irrigation ditches which they would use. The battlefield was set, and Poncho Villa and all his troops, again the largest army in Mexico at the time, descended on the city of Calais. They were not prepared for the barbed wire, and Poncho Villa himself rode in the midst as the machine guns were cutting down his men, entangling the barbed wire. The horses couldn't get through. He personally had his 2 6-shooters. He was killing the Federals as he rode up. And his horse came to one of these irrigation ditches. And on the other side of the irrigation ditches, they had some of the Indians from Yucatan. And these Indians were extremely cruel. The only weapons they had were long spears made of wood. And they used these spears to impel the horses and their riders as they tried to cross these irrigation ditches. And Poncho Villa's horse was impaled. He's out of ammunition, but he took his machete and he decapitated one of the Indians that was close to him. And about that time, one of his other officers rode up and pulled him up on a horse behind him, and he escaped. But during this battle, Manuel Gonzaullas set up a sniper's nest, and he had an assistant by the name of Rafael Ortega. Rafael Ortega was a young boy, and Poncho Villa marched into his little pueblo and made a fiery speech about the revolution and said, now everybody that's 14 years or older is either going to join the army or get hung in the morning. That's your decision. So of course, most of the men joined the army. Some of them were able to escape that night. But Ortega is one of the men, and he's been assigned to work with Poncho Villa, been assigned to work with Manuel Gonzaullas because he recognizes Poncho Villa and he's able to point him out. And unbeknownst to Manuel, Ortega is keeping a manual and keeping track of the number of men that Manuel Gonzaullas kills. And in this particular fight at the city of Calais, he kills 77 men with his rifle. And he also destroys an artillery unit because he's able to get behind them, and they have these caissons which are like cabinets that hold the artillery shells, and he's able to fire in and hit the caps on one of those shells, and it blows up all the ammunition and kills 10 men with that one shot. But Ortega keeps track of all this. The next battle is at the Battle of Leon. And in Leon, Poncho Villa has learned about the trenches and the barbed wire, so he has his own trenches and barbed wire. He's at the town first, and he's defending the town. So when the Federal troops get there, they dig their trenches, and you've got a situation much like World War I, the two enemies looking at each other from trenches and barbed wire entanglements. Now it's in the summertime, the battle starts in June and it's terribly hot, and men actually from the heat, they go insane and they'll run out into no man's land and of course get cut down by the gunners. Manuel and Ortega work at night. They go through the barbed wire, they learn their way through it, and their mission is to find and destroy the enemy's machine gun nests. And there's no weapons used other than knives, and they simply cut the throats of the machine gun nest men, and they spike the guns so they're no good anymore. And again, Ortega keeps track of the number of men killed, and during that conflict, Manuel takes out 44 of Villa's men with his knife. Now, one of the men is not quite dead, whose throat has been cut, and he manages to pull the pin on a hand grenade, and Manuel is gravely injured and he's put in a hospital. When he wakes up, he's next to General Obregon, who's head of all federal troops, and Obregon and he become good friends. Now the final battle is a battle at Agua Puente. Agua Puente is right across the Texas border from Douglas, Texas, and Villa likes to attack at night, surprise attacks. And unbeknownst to Villa, Obregon, the federal general, has made an arrangement with the Texas Army, with the United States Army. They have anti-aircraft searchlights, and they put these searchlights on flat cars and move them to the vicinity of the battle. They set up trip wires, and when the cavalry comes through that night and hits those trip wires, blink, 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 all these searchlights, anti-aircraft searchlight comes on, and the Mexican troops find themselves in a field of light. Well, of course, the machine guns open up. Manuel's using his sniper's rifle, and he's also using tracer bullets, so he can watch his bullet go into his enemy, and he's very careful not to kill any of the horses, only the men. And that particular night, he kills 63 men. Now, this is the final and the climax of the battle. Poncho Villa makes one more try, but his men have dwindled so, and it's in the wintertime, and they don't have enough to eat, and they're miserable. A lot of them die from the weather. And finally, an armistice is signed. Poncho Villa is given a hacienda and 25,000 acres in the state of Chihuahua, and a monthly pension of 50,000 pesos a month. So he's on that ranch. Now, the war is over, and Manuel T. Gonzaullas can no longer kill Poncho Villa and his men legally, so he crosses the border and joins the Texas Rangers. Now, we have several Texas Ranger war stories in there that I won't go into, but they're pretty good stories. But getting back to the assassination of Poncho Villa, in 1923, Manuel is working as a Texas Ranger out of Laredo, Texas, and he gets a telephone call from a furniture dealer in Parral, Mexico. Parral is in the state of Chihuahua. All this, that's the northern part of Mexico, right across from El Paso and Laredo. Now, he gets this telephone call, and the man wants an appointment with Manuel. He says, I cannot discuss my business on the phone, but if you will come and have breakfast with me Sunday morning at the Palacio Hotel in Nuevo Laredo, which is the city just across the border from Laredo, said, I will discuss some information with you you'll be very interested in. The two men meet for breakfast, and this is what Manuel learns. Rafael Gomez is a furniture dealer in Parral, Mexico. Parral is the closest city to Poncho Villa's hacienda. And when Poncho Villa got to hacienda, he came to Rafael to buy furniture. Rafael's family has a furniture business there, and they manufacture furniture in that city. And he bought all the furniture for his hacienda there. And he bought it on credit. And he told Rafael, he said, I get a monthly check of 50,000 pesos a month from the government, and I'll pay you. But 3 years has gone by and he hasn't paid, and he keeps promising to pay, but he never does. So Raphael goes to his brother, who is an attorney, and he says, I would like to sue Poncho Villa. Well, his brother laughs him out of his office because he says, you don't sue Poncho Villa. Says he kills men like you swat flies. I'm not about to get involved in that. But when Poncho Villa dies, then you will have a claim against his estate. Light bulb goes off in Raphael's head. He knows that Manuel Gonzaullas is very angry with Poncho Villa. So they're meeting for breakfast at the Nacional Hotel there in Laredo. And he explains his problem. And he says, now every Saturday afternoon, about 4 o'clock, Poncho Villa and his men drive right by my furniture shop. Says he has a mistress in town that he spends every Saturday night with. Her name is Soldado. She has 6 toes. They say she is a witch and has extreme sexual powers. And said, now if you will come to Parral, we can set up an ambush for Poncho Villa and you can take him out. Well, Manuel is all for this and the deal is made. Now, it's October 23rd, 1923. It's a Saturday afternoon. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Manuel Gonzaullas and his rifle are on top of the building. Poncho Villa and his Dodge automobile and 3 of his men come right down the road right under him. Now they have made arrangement. Raphael has 2 sons. One son stands in an intersection, and when he sees the car go by and he recognizes Poncho Villa, he takes his sombrero off. Viva Cepis! Viva Villa! There's another brother who has a donkey and a load of hay. About 2 blocks down the street, he starts out into the street with his donkey, and the donkey box in the street is blocked. The car rolls up, and of course Poncho Villa himself gets out to help the boy out, get the donkey out of the street. Now Manuel has got him in his sights, his fingers on his trigger, and about that time, some Catholic school children flood out into the street, and he has to abort his mission. But the next Saturday, the Catholic school children don't show up. And his first shot takes Poncho Villa squarely in his chest, and he kills the 3 other men in the car. The 4th one gets away and is badly wounded. And in his story, he wrote the story, and that's what I'm quoting to you. That's where this came from. Now, Manuel Gonzaullas with a ski mask, wool black ski mask over his face, comes down off the building, and with a machete, he cuts Poncho Villa's head off. He puts it in a sack and catches the train for Hermosillo, Mexico, where Don Luis Teresa's hacienda is, and his 3 brothers are buried in the cemetery behind the chapel there. Late at night, he goes out with Poncho Villa's head in that sack. He digs a hole at the foot of his brothers' graves and buries Poncho Villa's head at the feet of his 3 brothers' graves. Now, supposedly, Poncho Villa's skull today is at the Skull and Crossbones Fraternity at Harvard University. They say it's Poncho Villa's skull. We don't know for sure. But we do know how his head got cut off and where it was buried. Now, there's more to the story of this. There's many facets in there. One story I should tell you, because Manuel took the position of a return to public hangings and corporal punishment in the schools, and we'll discuss that later. But this is the story I think you'll find interesting. In February of 1940, Manuel Gonzaullas was promoted to captain of the Rangers and put in charge of Company B here in Dallas. He made a museum out of the company headquarters where he displayed guns and knives and wanted posters and things where, you know, if you wanted to visit the Ranger headquarters, you could browse around. And this one particular day, there was this large teenage boy. And while the group that he was with went off and was doing what they should do, he got into the private files. There were filing cabinets all out there, and he was reading the criminal reports. Well, this irritated Captain Gonzaullas, and he came out and told the boy, he said, those are not for public display. He said, close the file and go with your group. He went back into his office and didn't think any more about it, and he came back out later, and the boy was back into the files. So he walked up to the boy and got him by the ear. Now, the boy outweighs him by 60 pounds, and he has to reach up to get that ear. He's a big boy. Gets him by the ear, leads him outside, and throws him down on the ground and tells him, I told you to stay out of those files. Now, you're not welcome to come back inside. The boy starts to get up, and Gonzaullas slaps him with that open hand, knocks him back down, and starts lecturing to him about what every teenage boy should know about manners and respect for the elders. The boy tries to get up 2 or 3 times. Gonzaullas knocks him back down to the ground every time he tries to get up. The boy is furious, and the lecture is over, and he tells him, I'm going to tell my father, and you'll hear about this. He said, you tell anybody you want to, son. He didn't think any more about it, but the next day he got a call from the boy's father. He said, are you the ranger that slapped my son? He said, yes, I am. So what? He said, well, I would like to talk to you about that. And they set up an appointment, and the father was to come by the next afternoon after the office closed. M.T. Gonzaullas asked one of the other rangers to stay as a witness in case there was any rough stuff. He wanted it told just exactly like it happened. The father showed up, and he's rather a meek, mild-mannered man, and Gonzaullas was surprised. The father first said, are you the ranger that slapped my son? He said, yes, I am. And he said, well, his mother and I want to thank you. He said, this boy is much larger than either one of us. He's unruly. We cannot control him, and he has threatened us if we try to discipline him. And we appreciate what you've done. Now, I was speaking to the Morning Rotary Club out in Royce City, and an attorney by the name of Bill Ellis said, yes, that was Ormai Hersham, who was the founder of the Gaston Avenue Episcopal Hospital. And he said, I probated his will, and in his will he had instructions that if his son threatened or harmed anybody in the family, we were to contact Captain Gonzaullas. Now, this is one other thing. When Captain Gonzaullas was asked at his retirement party at Coon Creek in Athens, Texas, what he thought about the way the criminal courts were being handled, he said, I've had it up to here. He said, these liberal panty-waist judges are pardoning and releasing and giving life sentences to people that ought to be put away and taken off the streets for the rest of their life. He said these juries and these judges should witness and talk to some of these people that have been brutalized, raped, and the families of people who have been killed, and they show mercy to these people. And he was asked about the schools, and he said, well, that's quite simple. He said, you can't control a healthy, red-blooded teenager with words. That you've got to have a paddle to get his attention. It's like that mule that you try to talk to, and you can't talk him into doing something. You hit him right between the eyes with a 2x4 and get his attention, and then he'll listen to you. So this was Gonzaullas' platform for corporal punishment and public hangings. And I'll rest my case here, and if there's any question or anybody wants to take the opposite side of that, I'll be glad to do the best I can for Captain Gonzaullas.
Ask me first. Somebody get any questions? Thank you. You did such a great job. Nobody has any questions. I can't believe it.
Excuse me. You mentioned the Texas Ranger. There was a Texas Ranger Museum here in Dallas. Did I hear that? Is it still here? It's not. I've been to the one in Waco. I was going to say that one in Waco. It was very interesting. It was a wonderful experience. Okay.
Let me have that. There's one other little caveat I'd like to add to this story that kind of gives it some color. When I was a youngster in grade school, my father used to bring me in on Saturday afternoons to the Lakewood Country Club and let me swim while he played poker. And one day I noticed this man while I was swimming who was sunning himself, who was terribly scarred. And I asked the lifeguard, my friend Franklin Phoebe, I said, who is that man and what happened to him? Looks like he was run over by a train or something. He said, well, I don't know who he is or how he got those scars, but they call him Manny. So I asked my father about the fellow Manny, and he said, yes, that's the Texas Ranger, M.T. Gonzaullas. And he said, I don't know how he got those scars. But this was my first interest in Manuel T. Gonzaullas. And of course, those scars came from the fight with the Indians, the fight with the boxers, and of course, some fights during the Mexican Revolution. It seemed like everywhere he went, there was always some cause or battle and some bad guys that ought to be taken down. But then I spoke to the East Dallas Exchange Club who meet at the Lakewood Country Club. And when I finished my presentation, one of the men spoke up and he said, well, I was program chairman for this club in 1960, and M.T. Gonzaullas was our speaker. So he was right here in Dallas, right among us. He lived in Lakewood. And a great piece of Texas and Southwestern history just lay in there fallow. And I am so glad to get it in a book and get it saved. Thank you.
You know, you mentioned just briefly that the reason that Kennedy was killed was, I think you said, as clear as the nose on your face or something like that. But I had never heard of a Mexican or an Irish mafia. And you know, as many times as I've gone down to the JFK Museum, I don't recall seeing very much space given to that. I just wanted to say a word more.
Okay, now you're going to the JFK assassination, and you're trying to establish the Irish mafia. You're going to the JFK assassination, and you're trying to establish the Irish mafia. Is that your question? Yeah. Okay. Let's go back to 1931. In 1931, Big Al Capone was put in jail for income tax evasion. His number one hitman, Sam Giancana, at the next syndicate meeting, boldly took Al's seat, reached into his belt, took out a .45 automatic, chambered around, laid it down in front of him, and said, I'm taking Al's seat. Does anybody object? Nobody objected. So Sam Giancana is running the Italian Mafia. In the meantime, Joe Kennedy, head of the Irish Mafia, was bringing his booze across Lake Michigan through Detroit. Now, if you were in any kind of mischief in Detroit, illegal mischief that had a profit, you were supposed to get permission from the Purple Gang. They control Detroit, and you're supposed to pay them a percentage. The going price was 25% of your profit, and you know, we'll give you police protection and none of our boys will jump you. Well, Kennedy chose not to pay any attention to that, and he armed his convoys of trucks with Thompson submachine guns. The Purple Gang set up a roadblock, and they got blown away. 2 of their men got killed. But the Purple Gang was very upset about this, and they put a contract out on Joe Kennedy's life. Now, Joe took the contract very seriously, and he came to Sam Giancana, who is Italian, and he wanted to negotiate. Sam Giancana doesn't like the Irish, and he especially doesn't like Joe Kennedy. So he plays capriciously with the big Irishman's life. But finally, he goes to the Purple Gang in Detroit, and he says, think of an amount of money that would make you very happy. And they did. Then Sam Giancana thought of an amount of money that would make him very happy for brokering the deal. And he went back to Joe Kennedy, and he said, this is what it takes to get you off the hook, Joe. The big Irishman choked. He turned red in the face. He coughed. He darn near died of apoplexy right there, but he did pay. Now, he never forgot. And that was just one story, and there's several about how they double-crossed each other, they killed members of the gang, and so forth. There is a power struggle, and what they're after is that cash flow that is created by United States taxes. They want to build the highways, dig the sewer lines, all the construction, the unions. They want all this controlled, and they want something right off the top. This is what it's all about. Now, the gang warfare continues, and of course the Irish get in control when Kennedy gets elected. And 261 indictments against mafia dons all across the United States were in place the day that Kennedy got assassinated. And once Kennedy was assassinated, and the friend of the mafia, Lyndon B. Johnson, became president of the United States, all those indictments just went away like snow in the rain. And the Italians won. They way underestimated, the Irish mafia way underestimated the Italians. But that, I hope that answers your question. And if you read the book, you'll be an expert.
Thanks.
Detroit's not on Lake Michigan,
Where is it?
Lake Huron.
Okay, that's the lake they were crossing.
Yeah, okay, here's the other thing. I understood that Poncho Villa's head was removed from his grave. It was taken from
Yeah,
his grave.
well, this is
So-
this is the story.
That's the story. Oh, so that's the lie, I guess.
It could have been removed from the grave and gone to the skull and bones.
Oh, I see.
Well, Pancho Villa, wherever he's buried now, has no head.
Correct. Okay.
But nobody, I'll say, but nobody knows for certain where the head is.
Yeah.
The legend is that the Skull and Bones, which is their secret
Yes.
society, has it.
Yeah, they have a skull that they're saying is Pancho Villa. It
But
could be.
nobody had no idea how they might have gotten it, or, okay.
check his dentist
Nobody knows. Thank you.
You bet.
When Gonzaullas became a ranger officer in the Dallas office, was that office the one that was located at Fair Park?
Yes.
Well, okay, I kind of wondered about that. My mom took her driving lessons there from the rangers at that station way back.
Well, I
back in the day.
visited that station as a young boy, and there was a water-cooled Browning machine gun in there, and I met Gonzaullas, and he allowed me to sit and look down the sights of that weapon, and I'll never forget that. That was a thrilling moment in a young man's life.
I think Skull and Bones is at Yale University, not Harvard. But I think also they dug up and stole the skull of Geronimo and have that there also in their
Holy
installation.
smokes.
And I think anyone who thinks a little bit can realize that these people are extremely occult to be doing things like this. And I think that we look at the leaders of this country who have been and are members of Skull and Bones, and we see that we've got some real deceiving people in this country.
Yeah, I would take the fact that those skulls are who they say they are with a grain of salt.
Anybody else?
Okay, I'd just like to say the books are $30 each. If you want one, I'll sign it for you.
Any other questions? That's it? Okay, you get to sit down. Okay, now it's your turn to talk. So who wants to be first? There has to be a first. Somebody want to be first here? Respond what the speaker has had to say? I know it's tough, but tough act to follow. Who wants to be first? Come on up here.
Hi, you guys. I won't go for 25 minutes this week. Short and sweet. Thank you very much for your presentation. I found this to be very colorful and really refreshing to have something up here at the College of Complexes that had a historical basis. I felt like I was riding on the train along the Gulf Coast with Lone Wolf Gonzaullas. I felt like I was right there when he bitch slapped that unruly kid. And I just felt like I was right there with him at the blacksmith's office while he was reloading the bullets and practicing his weapons. And I think that this was a very romantic affectation. It seemed to be very fact-based and well studied, and he put so much research into this. And I just really enjoyed your presentation. It was so colorful. Thank you very much for coming out.
Thank you.
Okay, who's next? We got next?
Let her go again.
I can't believe this. Yeah, don't forget, he's got some real good books here if you want to get one.
Let's take a vote to see who's in favor of corporal punishment in schools.
Oh, all right, let's take a vote to see who's in favor of corporal punishment in the schools. There's one. Two, he wants to know how many people are in favor of corporal punishment in the schools. There's three.
Now ask them how many have been victims of corporal punishment in schools.
How many have been victims of corporal punishment in the schools? One.
Tom, you've been hit by those nuns.
Oh yeah, I've been too.
You were getting a lot.
Him too. And three. All right, there we go. There's several here.
Get some testimony for those that are victims, see what they think.
All right, he wants some testimony from victims of corporal punishment in schools, what they think about it.
Go ahead, talk about the nuns. Go ahead.
Well, the nuns were mean, but they were tough. But you know, they slap you. They get you with a three-pointed roller and wrap you one, hit you in the head, put dents in your head. You know, it's how it was. I remember that. Well, when I first started, there were 70 in the class. That's a lot of kids in one class. First grade, 70 kids in the class. Which I guess is more than they have in class now. But yeah. Well, that's what we had, 70. And the nuns kept us in line. They whacked us, you know. How it worked. Go ahead. You want to come up here? Max Smith.
I'll tell you a story. When I was 6 years old and I started school, my father came down to the school to meet the teachers. And I'm standing there and I hear him tell this teacher, he said, "This is my son Mac." He said, "If he gives you any trouble, you have my permission to spank him. And if you'll let me know that you did it," he said, "when he gets home, he'll get another one." And I'm looking up and I'm thinking, this is some kind of conspiracy. But I was a pretty well-behaved child. I only recall being spanked one time when I was in school. And I didn't bother to tell my parents about it. And I shock people sometimes when I tell them that ADD can be cured with a stick. Ritalin has not been around forever. It came in the 60s, late 60s sometimes. Before that, it was cured with a stick. And it worked pretty well. I don't recall anybody, when I grew up, I don't recall anybody being diagnosed as having ADD. You know, if you've got enough pressure on you, you learn to control yourself. There may be some people that are just incorrigible, but it's certainly not 15 or 20% of the population that takes Ritalin nowadays. Well, sugar had been invented back in those days, and some people ate it. But, you know, there's a lot of benefits to that. I think that a teacher with a stick can control a much bigger class than a teacher who doesn't have a stick. You know, there's a certain amount of respect. My father told me one time, he said, you know, you read in the Bible, fear the Lord, and then you read in the Bible, respect the Lord. And he said, those two words are pretty close together. You know, there has to be a little fear to get respect, and teachers don't get much respect nowadays. I don't know if you are a teacher or if you've ever tried to do substitute teaching, but you go into a classroom today and you discover they don't get a lot of respect because they don't have any tools. The kids don't want to be in class, and the only remedy that a teacher has is to send them out of class. And it's like, so what? If they leave the class, they just wander around until the next class starts. So, you know, I'm a fan of corporal punishment. I use that with my kids. They've all turned out well, and they're all college graduates and supporting themselves. So, you know, was on me. It goes back for thousands of years. So, you know, before you say, well, we shouldn't do that anymore, you got to think about what kind of results we're getting with the methods we use today.
You got one now? Come on up here.
Well, I'll say a couple of words on that subject. Corporal punishment can be very cruel. That's really a function of the person who administers it. I grew up with a father who basically had no father. His father was kicked in the head by his horse when my dad was about 3 years old. So he and his two brothers grew up with a very mild-mannered mother. She never remarried. They had a small farm here on the south side of town. And existed, you know, there were no corporate benefits of any kind. Anyway, has nothing to do with spanking. But he never really got spanked other than some light switching from his mom. I'm just saying that to say he really didn't have any example of fatherly discipline of a child. And he would let me get into mischief until it just got totally under his skin. And he would take me out to the garage and take off his belt and give me a good one. Sometimes I would have, you know, some little marks on my leg, but I was never injured. So I was accustomed to that at home. Did it make me a perfect child? No. Did it make me emotionally mad at the world? No. Did it make me hate authority? No. I just knew if I walked over the line, I better be willing to pay the price, right? Okay. School, we did have corporal punishment, usually the principal or the assistant principal. Sometimes got it in the classroom with a ruler. 10th grade, I can still remember Bill Lovell, who taught history down at Woodrow Wilson, became head of the ROTC the next year, and he was a pretty stern guy. And we were at 10th grade, we were pretty mischievous guys, and so he didn't bother to send us down to the principal's office. He'd just bring us up to the front of the room and give us one right there in front of everybody. He had a nice paddle with holes drilled into it. Whack, 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 whack. Would that have emotionally injured someone? Maybe so. But the reality is not many people in the room raised their hands, but you get into our generation and back, there was a lot of that going on. It was very common. Did it cause a horribly wounded society? I don't think so, compared to today. Did it cause a bunch of mean people to grow up and say, I'm going to beat anybody up if they look at me crooked, and my kids do anything wrong, I'm going to work them over good? I don't. You know, I really didn't experience that with my friends who I grew up with. I personally determined I would not spank my children because I was determined to discipline them in a way that wasn't required. That was my reaction to it. I just didn't think it was worthwhile. So basically what I would try to do was, when they did something that just pushed me over the edge, and we all have had that happen with children, I try to wait several minutes and get my calm and my cool, and I'd take them and set them down, and I'd get right up in their face, and I'd talk to them in a calm tone of voice, just like I'm standing up here talking tonight. It worked so much better than a spanking. You know, they knew that Dad was dead dog serious, and they feared in the back of their mind they've told me later that if they ignored that they would likely maybe get a good whacking, although they never did. And so I grew up in a household that had it, that worked okay. Our household, neither my wife nor myself ever gave a spanking to our 3 children. That worked too. So what's the magic solution? I don't know. But I can tell you, my friends who've taught in DISD with the no discipline rules, like was mentioned a minute ago, wild ones in the classroom, unrestrained. If the teacher takes them down to the assistant principal's office, a lot of times they've been promoted up into that job and told not to cause any ruffles, so they don't do anything to discipline the children. If the child is talked to pretty tough by the parent, by the teacher, the next day they get called down to the principal's office. The angry parent is sitting there, and they cuss them out with every dirty word you ever heard in your friggin' life. Poor teacher. How they can put up with it, I don't know. So school discipline needs to be a little tougher, in my humble opinion.
Okay, who's next?
I'm sorry I got here about 15 minutes late for your presentation, but I really enjoyed what I heard. And it sounds like you've done a lot of research and know a lot of things in history. And that was an area that I didn't know anything about, and I appreciated hearing about it. When it comes to corporal punishment, I had parents who just were very reluctant to do that to their children, although my father sometimes, he would have a temper and we would misbehave. There were 3 of us. I was the youngest and probably the one who was always taking things apart to see how it was ticking and so forth, and driving my parents nuts in that regard. And so my dad, we had these hedges out alongside of an area in the house, and he would go out there and he'd say, okay, children, you need some discipline now. And he'd pick these long switches and he'd peel the leaves off of them, and boy, now those would hurt. And so we would just put out the biggest crying scene you've ever heard, so that he would just nearly himself break into tears, and we'd watch him like that, and it worked. But then we'd really cry so much that he'd still think he was hurting us too much, so he left the leaves on after that. And of course they didn't hurt at all, but we'd whine and whine and whine, and he'd figure, well, I did my job, and so forth. I think, however, the corporal punishment can be carried far beyond what is sane. And I think if anyone has ever read the book Sybil, you will realize that that person was driven into, I think, 13 different personality segments by extreme cruelty of her mother. And up until her, none of the psychiatrists really even believed in or knew anything about the subject of multiple personality disorders. But pain can often drive, particularly children, into multiple personalities. And frankly, the CIA today has institutes around the country where they do this on purpose. They'll pick out somebody on the street they think might be a good subject to convert into some kind of a drone, which I think most of these shootings that are going on are done that way. I've read where Sirhan today still has no memory of ever having shot Kennedy. It's because he was in another segmented personality. And there was a Dr. Hammond who gave a speech at a national meeting of psychiatrists, and he really had gone into this and taken it apart and realized that it is so systematic and it is so perverse and widespread. And most of the people involved in it, their families were satanic, although they may go to your local Catholic church or your Protestant church of some kind or whatever. That's just for cover. that they're well into this, and then frankly what I've been learning is that a lot of our leadership, if not all of it in the world beyond what we really see, they're all involved in it. And it's the carrying of this kind of corporal punishment way beyond the norm for other purposes, even just some person who wants to vent their own anger because they can't control this kid. That's wrong. And that's where I've said this 100 times here, probably not quite, but every degree of emotion necessarily alters your perception of reality. And therefore, when it's in a very emotional situation, particularly with children, you need to rein in that emotion and think as logically and clearly as possible and know what your real end goal is and what's the best step to take to get there. Corporal punishment, I think it has its proper place, but with great reserve and with a great deal of suppression of emotion driving one to do that, and logical thinking of what that child needs now. Has all of the explanation and the other kinds of discipline not worked? For instance, I became nearly addicted to flying model airplanes and just loved it, built every one I could for years and years, and every Sunday our little club would go to the ballpark about 3 miles away across town, tiny town where we lived, and fly model airplanes. And if I was bad that week, Dad wouldn't take me over to fly those model airplanes. And that was a bad day when that happened. So that taught me a lesson right there. There are a lot of other ways of handling that. And I'm very reserved on corporal punishment, although I think here and there is a place for it with limits.
Well, I hadn't really planned on talking tonight, and I was sitting there and I had one story that I was going to tell, and then I thought of a better one. But, you know, I mentioned last week that, you know, I was a psychologist for the federal prison system, and I can tell you that there were a number of times that I would get, say, called to segregation, or I would see somebody during the intake or something like that, and they would say, "Doc, you can't lock me up. I suffer from claustrophobia." And I saw a guy in segregation once that told me that. The other thing that they would declare is that, you know, I suffer from multiple personality, and I think with that fellow, I said, well, it happened more than once, but the one I'm thinking of, I think I said to him, "Did you tell that to your attorney?" And he said, "I don't think I did." And I said, you know, here we are. How long has it been since you've been to court? You know, and you didn't tell your attorney. He's the guy that you really ought to be talking to about this. Anyway, it's something that happens. I'm going to tell you another quickly. When I was a kid, I think I set a record for the number of swats. And I mentioned that I was a terrible student. And my mother sent me to a Lutheran school, not a Catholic school, but a Lutheran school. Pardon me. And anyway, one day I didn't bring my homework. And I had a habit of not bringing my homework. And so he said, "You're going to have to stay in for recess." Well, I didn't pay any attention to that. So I was out on the playground, and this friend of mine looked up, and I heard him say, "Uh-oh, this doesn't look good." And I looked up, and the teacher was coming. He had the most humongous paddle I ever saw. And he gave me 5 swats on the playground. And I thought, boy, that really hurt. I'm not going to forget my homework again. And then when he got back up into class, he gave me 6 more. And that I think was the record. And did I ever forget my homework again? No. I always had my homework. Did I tell my parents? No, never did.
Okay, who's next? That's me next. Any more? Come on up here.
Well, I was given 6 of the best by the headmaster for dumb insolence. In fact, R.J. King, headmaster, would come on the stage every day and say, "My name is Frank. I'm Frank Leopold," at whatever it was. So I naturally went around saying, well, his name must be Frank, you see. So one day he came out and again said, "I am Frank," and I was standing back and I smiled at this and he saw me. So he gave me the cane and afterward. After giving me the cane, he said some very, I didn't mind the cane, but he said some very kind of personal, insulting things. So I went home and I said, Dad, you better go up and sort this character out because he said some things that I find unacceptable. And so my father did, and so that was that, So, but later on, he was pretty decent to me. I became the captain of the school and stuff like that, so he didn't hold it against me at all. About violence, as I said, I believe that violence is pornography, really. It's not sex that's pornographic, it's really violence. And what my wife shudders at is seems to be a glorification of violence, and you see it in films in Hollywood. It seems to, that's what sells. And every time she sees it, she shudders because the people around us are laughing. They regard it as somehow funny or enjoyable to see this violence. And really a society that glorifies violence, there must be something wrong, really. So, in the 50s and 60s, the BBC would never show violence, graphic violence. They just wouldn't show it. Because, violence, I think, begets violence. And America really is too ready to, engage in violence. They go around the world with their many, 150 bases, and they think they can solve problems around the world with violence, and it just doesn't work. I mean, they kill innocent people, and the population turns against them, and it's Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, wherever it is, it's completely a dead loss. It doesn't work. You have to, in the end, negotiate. Like it or not. As Lord famous Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, Lord Palmerston said, he was about 1820 to 1830, said, there are no permanent enemies and there are no permanent friends, but this world you must sit down and negotiate. So solving things, really a culture of violence, I think, is counterproductive. My parents didn't hit me. I said I was only caned for dumb insolence, which is, knowing me, is not surprising, is it? My dad would, in fact, during the war, because there was just my sister and my mother and granny looking after me, so I wasn't surrounded by male authority figures, so I never really learnt to be very obeying to authority. Still I'm not. But anyway, so that's it. I think message is violence doesn't pay. It's not to be glorified. It's counterproductive. And I think as a society, America should recognize that and cut out running around the world trying to have big armies and solve the world's problems. It ain't working, folks.
Any more next? Are we running out of people? Am I the last one standing? No one else wants to say anything? Right. You want to get up here again? Well, come on up here. No, you're talking about lynching. You come on up here. We're waiting for you.
if I can get us a little bit back on point. We went on a tangent about corporal punishment for a while and why we all think it's so great or so horrible. I saw some other things here with lone Wolf Gonzaullas. It said he stood for public hangings. And I think that we have all seen these grim scenes in our motion pictures in the Dark Ages in the medieval times, or at the beginning of one of those Pirates of the Caribbean movies where they were lynching people. Frankly, I'd like to see that again. I would like to see some public hangings. But let me cover the bases there, as long as it's the people I would like to see hang. People that bother me, that I don't like, that I think need to be hung. You know, I'm not going to dance around that. And just like with one fool at a time, please. You see, I've totally lost my train of thought here. Just like with the corporal punishment. Oh yes, if this suits my needs in the way that I see it in my perspective, yes, this is a good thing. Well, public hangings, I see it the same way. Yes, let's hang them in the square at high noon. I'm all for it. Just a little off topic, I saw in the news a couple of years back how the head of the DDA, or their FDA, wasn't it, in China? Wasn't he shot? I said, what a novel idea. We ought to do that here. We ought to get the head of the FDA and just methodically shoot them every few years. That would be wonderful. We should do that. That's great. I love that. But I'm all for the public hangings. Just like the beginning of the Pirates of the Caribbean, as long as it's the people I think need to be hung. And I'm not gonna make any ifs, ands, or buts about that. It would be my hard-headed approach, and if it was my world, that's what I'd do. Thanks.
I guess I'm the last one standing unless someone else wants to come out here.
I'll supplement my remarks about capital punishment. Corporal punishment. Not quite that severe. Obviously, there's a difference between corporal punishment and sadism. And you want to use corporal punishment if everything else has failed. But that said, you don't want to let your children push you to the point that you've lost your temper, because that's how children get hurt. You know, people don't discipline kids and they just get more and more in your face. I don't know whether it's because they're starved for attention or what, but every once in a while somebody snaps and the kid gets hurt, as opposed to, you know, you need to stop things that are intolerable before they get to the point that you can't control yourself. That's just my thought on that. Now, on the subject of capital punishment, if there's any value in capital punishment, it's one, is that the guy that gets it is not going to do that same crime again. The second is that it ought to be terrible and horrible, because part of the rationale for that is to deter other people. You don't want somebody to just comfortably go to sleep. That's not much of a deterrent for people that might do that same kind of crime. So, you know, and the third is an expression of society's outrage that they did that kind of a crime. It has to be a horrible crime to get capital punishment. And the first purpose is served however you execute somebody, but the other two are not served by painless executions. And it's just unfathomable to me that we worry about, did he feel a pinprick when they put the needle in him? You know, I was anesthetized 3 times last year, and that could have been capital punishment. It's just a matter of whether I woke up or not. The feeling is the same. And it was for surgeries, and it's, you know, so what? It's hard for me to feel a lot of sympathy for somebody that, well, you know, he coughed a little before he died and that sort of thing. They call this a botched execution in Oklahoma. The guy's dead, it wasn't botched. You know? And it was certainly no more cruel than what he did to his victims. And, you know, until it rises to that standard, I don't have too much sympathy for him. I think really that the courts ought to concern themselves with the unusual part of the execution and let the legislature concern itself with whether or not it's cruel. the term is cruel and unusual punishment.
I am opposed to capital punishment. I think that we have so far to go in our spiritual development, and that is one aspect of society, killing, period, that is holding us back. And it is materializing consciousness all the more. I'm one of the people who thinks that the material experience that we're having is illusory. And there's so many times when things happen in human events that absolutely contradict the so-called laws of physics and physiology. And I think I've used an example once more. I'll just do it real quick here. There was a man, I was listening to the radio on this years ago, 60s. There was a man who was a paratrooper in the German Air Force, and he went out of an airplane at Rhein-Main Air Force Base outside of Wiesbaden at 3,500 feet for a practice jump. His chute didn't open, and he fell right into the middle of the concrete runway, which for those heavy airplanes is probably a couple of feet thick. Well, that evening, when the astonished reporters were interviewing him in his hospital bed, sitting up alertly with his one broken leg and a bunch of bruises and no other internal or external injuries, they said, "How in the world did you survive that fall?" And he said, "Well, our instructor taught us how to land right. And he taught us that if we did land right, we could survive any fall. I knew how to land right. I knew I was going to land right. And I knew I was going to survive." And that film and that energy in his consciousness, which projected his future, determined a different outcome from the so-called laws of physics and physiology. Because that man should have been broken into 1,000 pieces hitting that runway at the velocity he came down. I mean, a free fall body will go at least 120 miles an hour with a parachute, so it's down to 70. How would you like to go into a brick wall at 70 miles an hour with nothing in front of you? The laws of physics and physiology are not laws. They're firmly held beliefs in all of human consciousness. And this goes on with, I mean, you can carry this principle on and on and on. Who was it? David Bohm was a physicist in England, and he was being interviewed in a book I used to have. They were studying what is this thing we call brain consciousness and all of this thinking. And so one of the interviews was his, others with psychiatrists and brain surgeons and so forth. And he started talking about what he called sudden insight. And he said, you know, sudden insight cannot happen as long as you're thinking at all. You must be able to move thinking out of consciousness and be totally quiet. And he said, when that, even thinking about not thinking will interfere with the process. And he said, when that can happen, sudden insight can happen. And here, this is this physicist in England, and he said, sudden insight completely explains to him instantaneous healing through prayer. And I know that this goes on all over the world nearly every day. In any event, I think that that passage in the Bible that alludes to the lion and the lamb lying down together will happen only when mankind universally on this planet ceases to kill. And I mean even for food. Because these animals, you can get a book called Veganist, and I got it, and I couldn't even read the chapter on the cruelty to the animals. The mother cow trying desperately to save her calf. All of the other things. It's just unbelievable. If people go to prison for cruelty to animals, all these people who raise chickens and turkeys and anything else for food need to be in prison for life right now, because the cruelty they put on animals is beyond belief. And look into it. Then you'll realize when you eat that piece of chicken what you've done by being a market for that. I think that mankind is very deluded into believing that physical things are the answer to it all. I look back at the ancient Egyptian kingdom. They had a goddess by the name of Ma'at, who was very, very respected. I think I've mentioned this before. The edicts that the goddess said to the priest, you know how that works, that would be given from Ma'at became national laws, and one of them was always speak the truth to everyone. Another was always treat everyone in a kindly manner. Well, now this is reflecting the idea that God is love and that God is truth. If we in this country lived by these principles alone as national laws or laws we have within ourselves to everyone, this would be a marvelous civilization, not what we have today. That ancient kingdom lasted for 5,000 years with extreme peace and prosperity, until it was, of course, overrun by gradual immigration and then a revolution and the end of the kingdom. This country, we think we have the finest principles. Well, our founding fathers did have some of the finest principles, but they're gone now. They don't exist anymore. I've seen it go in my lifetime. And we're not even 300 years old yet. So why do we think we're so good? Why do we think all this violence we do, like mentioned, we're the most violent nation on earth. We have our armies all over the world killing people every year by the millions. Innocent people. Drones kill thousands of innocent people. And these little video game players sit up there and, you know, maybe Cincinnati or somewhere and fly these drones in the Middle East and they knock off people. Well, big deal. They'll kill 100 innocent civilians and maybe get one of the guys they were after. These are the numbers that are pretty accurate in this respect. We are ultimately responsible for these things because it's our country and we do have a constitution that now has been scrapped that we must reach out and take back and drive these idiots out of the places of power that they're in and bring some sanity back to us, some divine love back into civilization.
Am I now the last man standing finally? All right. I want to thank our speaker. I think he did a terrific job tonight. I don't know where to, it's something that, I'm the last one standing, get the last word, but I forgot what I was going to say. I had all planned to get up here and listen to all this stuff, and I drew a blank. That happens sometimes, you know, it's one of those things. But anyway, I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. See, that's the problem. Here I am standing, not remembering what I wanted to say. It's terrible. Anyway, I'll leave our speaker gets to comment all the comment here tonight. He gets the last word. So come on up here, Mr. Speaker. You get the last word.
I want to say just one more word about corporal punishment. Being a cadet at Texas A&M back in the 40s, corporal punishment was very much the way things were run. Now, I was subjected to that in high school, but they really got down to business in Texas A&M. And I'll never forget the first whipping that I saw. I was a freshman. Sophomore came into our room. And one of my roommates was on the same football team I was in high school. And if you didn't snap to and your teeth weren't brushed and your shoes just so, any reason, the upperclassman could vent his wrath and indignation on your rear end. And they took my classmate out in the hall. This guy had a baseball bat that had been shaved and then wrapped with tape. And he drew back and he hit my classmate and he screamed like a woman. And he drew back to hit him again and I took the baseball bat away from him. This guy's name was Deadeye Thompson. They called him Deadeye because one of his eyes had been put out. He didn't bother to put a patch on it. It looked terrible. Played center on the football team. When I took that paddle away from him, he hollered sophomore. And I could hear the footsteps coming down the ramp, and I was surrounded with upperclassmen. And I was told that I was to stand in for my roommate, and we did. And that rascal hit me 5 times with that paddle. I had to soak my underwear off in the shower because I was bleeding. I couldn't sit down for about a week or 10 days. But let me tell you something, I was on the ball. I was what they call an on-the-ball freshman. Because boy, whatever they said do, I did it. But I stuck in there. And as a result of that, now some guys went home after an experience like that, but when you stuck with it, you developed a spirit de corps because you knew that other guy had been through that too. And there's just one other episode to this Deadeye Thompson thing. His right eye was out. And one Saturday out of the month, we had what we call fight night. And you could challenge or accept a challenge from any of the classmates. If you had something on your mind, you wanted to work out with him, you put the gloves on and you got it squared away one way or the other. That was the bet. So I challenged Thompson. I challenged Thompson because when I was 11 years old, for Christmas, my father gave me some boxing gloves. I was raised on a farm and I took those boxing gloves to the nearest friend whose farm was about 2 miles away, and we'd gather in the barns on Saturdays and go at it. And we established that rule of peck, and I moved up on that rule of peck because I was determined. And I knew what I was doing, and my very best friend only had one eye. And he was older than I was, but he was one of the farm boys. And I learned that if I circled towards that blind side, I could really belt him because he didn't see it coming. And here's Deadeye Thompson with only one eye. Anyway, they stopped the fight the second round because I had his face looking like ground hamburger. But we had an understanding. Deadeye and I became the best of friends. And it was explained to me that the pain that is distributed with this corporal punishment is a very delicate science. And you take a guy like myself who, boy, before I got into that kind of punishment, you know, I got 5 licks, so what? But this really got my attention. And I weathered the storm, and it was explained to me that when that pain is delivered, and it gets to the point where you think, my God, if I get struck again, I'm just going to fall apart, and they quit. This is perfection, because they have got your attention, they have made you a good on-the-ball freshman, you have developed a camaraderie with the other guys because they've been through the same deal, and they didn't quit. Now, there were students that their classmates actually took their belongings and moved them out onto the street and threw them out of the dormitory. And there's a definite spirit de corps at Texas A&M for those guys that survived. Now, things are not quite the same now because the corporal punishment is not there, but it did serve its purpose. Some of my classmates, it's only fair to say that I lost 40% of my classmates in the Korean War. Some of these men were subjected to the torture of the enemy. And they came back and told me, said, hell, those pumpkins didn't know anything about putting that pain on you like they did at A&M. So we could take that standing on our head. Well, that's only good for a certain class of people in a certain part of our population, but for those of us that survived it and came through it, as I say, there is a definite spirit de corps. I want to thank you so much for having me and letting me tell you about Manuel Gonzaullas. That's such a great Dallas, Texas and Southwestern history story, and I'm glad we've got it all pasted together and put in a book somewhere, so it's saved. Thank you so much.
Well, that's it for tonight. We're going to retire down to Starbucks down at the corner there, and our speaker's welcome there. We'll buy him some coffee and so on. And just so you know, we have to be out of here by 9 o'clock. So, and don't forget the speaker has some great books here if you want to get one.
This is William, your videographer from Two Hats Publishing. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like it, please leave comments below, or like us, or follow us and get notices